The golem. The public square of Caliphus had become a conflagration of fire and blood. The flesh golem lumbered at its center, a stitched colossus of corpse-pale muscle banded with copper rods and glass vials. Each step sent blue lightning crawling across its seams. The creature tossed a canister across the cobblestones that detonated in a concussive bloom of alchemical flame. Panicked citizens ran for cover. Horses screamed. Smoke rolled across the square like a living thing. Riker swore and vaulted a low iron fence without slowing.
Malachi! Get to the carriage!
The carriage lay on its side near the statue of a rodent, its lacquered panels burning, one wheel spinning uselessly. Inside, two citizens, an elderly woman and the boy, were pinned by a fallen bench as flames chewed through the roof lining. Malachi planted his holy symbol against his chest and ran.
Lady of Graves, guide my hands. Have mercy on these innocent souls, for it is not their time to pass.
His voice cut through the chaos, steady as a bell. He laid a hand against the carriage frame. The wood smoked, then darkened, fire recoiling as divine water hissed into being. Rikus was already there, dagger flashing. He wedged it under the warped door and heaved, muscles screaming. The door tore free with a shriek of iron. Another canister sailed overhead and burst against the statue's plinth. Stone fragments skived the square. Now, Rikus barked. Malachi slipped inside, soot streaking his face. He continued to pray, light pooling in his palm, and pressed it into the woman's chest. Her breath steadied. Rikus hauled the bench aside and scooped the boy up, tucking him under one arm as flames licked at his boots. They staggered clear as the carriage collapsed, a blossom of vivid alchemical flame. Across the square, Zenobia stood chanting as a ray of frost spiraled from her staff, coating the stone beneath the golem's feet. Electricity snapped and crawled along its legs, melting ice to steam. But the creature slowed, its joints locking. Angelica moved through the smoke, like a ghost, her blades flashing silver as she hacked at the construct. Jock met the thing head-on, hammer raised as the golem smashed down with electrified fists.
Get the canisters!
Graylin shouted from behind an overturned cart, loosing a protective incantation that warped the air. Angelica sliced at the bandolier on the golem's chest, and the big leather belt unraveled, spilling a dozen alchemical jars onto the ground. Zenobia's eyes went cold. She uttered an incantation and thrust her staff forward. The ground erupted beneath the golem's torso in a cone of ice and force. Fire flashed as the alchemical bottles exploded, tearing huge chunks of flesh from the creature's legs. Rikus set the boy down behind a fountain and turned back, hearing the blast.
By the gods of battle and my ancestor spirits, fill the hearts of my companions with a fighting rage.
Angelica was already moving. She leapt, caught the golem's shoulder seam, and drove both blades home. Grayling followed with a roar, thrusting his scimitar into the rent flesh. Electricity flared wildly, sparking into the air. The construct toppled, shattering across the square in a ruin of stitched limbs, ruined flesh, and steaming copper. For half a breath, the square held its silence. Then iron-shod boots thundered in from every street.
City Guard! Down on your knees!
Lantern light cut through the smoke as the officers fanned out, forming a practiced ring around the square. A captain pushed to the front, helmet crested, face set in the hard geometry of authority. He took in the ruined golem, the shattered canisters, the scorch marks of spellcraft. His gaze lingered on the party.
You there!
He said, pointing with his sword.
Weapons down! All of you, by order of Prince Ordranti, you are under arrest pending questioning for unlawful sorcery, public endangerment, and suspected necromantic activity.
Jock bristled. Angelica slipped out of view behind cover. Zenobia said nothing, eyes flicking to the alleys, measuring distances. Rikus laughed once, sharp and humorless.
Captain,
he said, gesturing at the smoking square.
We just saved a dozen lives.
The officer's eyes narrowed, and he began to move forward cautiously.
You can explain yourself to a judge.
Graylin grabbed the skald by the elbow.
Don't waste your breath. That's not how things work in this city. We are as likely to end up rotting away in a dungeon or be found floating in the river as to see an actual magistrate. Let's move.
In a blur, Angelica threw her dagger. A glass lantern shattered. Oil cascaded. Flame blossomed into choking black smoke. At the same instant, Zenobia slammed her staff to the ground, cracking stone. A rolling fog surged up, thick and unnatural, swallowing the square in seconds.
Now,
Zenobia said calmly. Rikus kicked at a guard's legs, sending him sprawling, then grabbed Malaki by the sleeve and hauled him toward the fountain. Jock was last to move, armor clattering as two bolts hissed past where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. By the time the smoke thinned, the square was empty but for the guards, the wounded, and the broken body of the golem. The captain stood amid the wreckage, jaw tight.
Find them,
He said.
quietly.
The ritual? Back at the Harriday Theatre, the velvet curtains were drawn tight and the lamps dimmed until the grand hall felt less like a place of performance and more like a sanctum. Beneath the stage, in the old stone basement that predated the theatre itself, Thalia the Mystic had prepared the ritual circle. Chalk sigils layered the floor in concentric rings, intersected with thin lines of powdered onyx and dream lotus ash. The air smelled faintly of incense and old dust, like a library sealed for centuries. At the center of the circle sat the object of her preparation, a small ivory staircase, no taller than a book when folded, its surface carved with impossible geometries, angles that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Talia's voice was low and steady as she explained the rite.
The staircase must be passed hand to hand,
She said.
Each of you impresses your own intention and will upon it. Break the chain, and the path will fracture.
The mystic looked at everyone and lowered her voice.
While the rite is active, the boundary between worlds thins. Things will notice you. Some will attempt to follow. Some will seek entry into our world.
No one spoke, but Malachi's hand tightened around his holy symbol. He looked at Rikus. The skald gave a grim smile, boosting the cleric's confidence a bit. Slowly, the staircase was handed around the table. As each adventurer touched it, the ivory warmed, faint lines along its surface glowing like moonlit bone. And the ivory talisman shuddered. With a sound like stone unfolding in a vast cavern, it elongated, step by step, growing downward rather than up. The basement floor seemed to soften, stretching into depth as the lowest stair vanished into shadow. Talia stepped back, sweat beading on her brow.
It's open.
She said.
Go before it widens further.
They descended. The cool cellar air peeled away like a discarded cloak as blistering sunlight poured down the staircase. Sand lashed at everyone's faces, carried on a howling wind that smelled of ancient desolation. Everyone descended the stairway. Malaki turned and watched as it dissolved behind them like mist, leaving no sign of the world above. They stood in a vast desert beneath a white, pitiless sun. The sky was too empty, its blue somehow wrong, too deep, too watchful. Dunes stretched in all directions, their crests etched with symbols that might have been writing or might have been scars. In the distance, half-buried stone arches jutted from the sand like the ribs of a colossal corpse. They had entered the Dreamlands, and the Dreamlands, already aware, were stirring. Rikus looked up into the merciless sun.
Why is it so hot here? What kind of hellscape is this?
Angelica laughed.
I love the way it feels on my skin. Better than the gray skies of Caliphus.
Malachi pointed. Even in the full glare of day, a gigantic moon hung in the sky, its pale surface sharply etched against the blue, its presence wrong in a way that made the eyes ache. The cleric shook his head.
All of this, it must be part of someone's dream. Someone very powerful.
Without warning, the desert erupted. A freak sandstorm coiled up from the dunes, spinning faster and faster until the world was reduced to shrieking wind and stinging grit. Sand pelted exposed skin like thrown needles. Cloaks snapped violently. Malachi heard voices, murmured promises, regrets, half-remembered prayers. Shapes flickered at the edge of his vision, distant figures beckoning, familiar faces smiling with impossible patience. The storm seemed to know them. His eyes glazed, his body turning as if guided by an unseen hand. He took a step, then another, walking straight into the storm's heart. Rikus lunged forward, grabbing him by the shoulder and hauling him back.
Friend, what are you doing?
Malachi struggled weakly for a moment, as though waking from deep sleep.
You couldn't hear them? Never mind.
The wind fell silent, and again the desert lay bare beneath the burning sun. In the distance, now visible through the clearing air, stood the walls of an abandoned caravansarai. Zenobia pointed.
We are here, wherever here actually is.
The Caravansarai. The party moved through the open gates into a walled courtyard. At its center stood a dry, circular fountain, its stone basin cracked and half filled with sand. Once carved figures along its rim, lions, merchants, and beasts of burden, had been worn nearly smooth, their faces erased by centuries of wind. Around the courtyard, tattered banners still clung to their poles, faded to the color of old bone and rust, stirring faintly despite the still air. There was no sign of life, no fire pits, no tracks, no refuse. The place felt stale, as though nothing had breathed there for a very long time. And yet, as the party moved deeper into the courtyard, sounds drifted through the space like echoes from another age. They heard the low murmur of merchants haggling in unfamiliar tongues, the grunt and shuffle of camels being led to water, the creak of leather and the clink of coin. The noises came and went without pattern, never loud, never close enough to locate. Whenever someone turned toward the sounds, they faded into nothing. Near one of the side chambers, partially concealed behind a collapsed archway, the group discovered several large wooden crates. Unlike everything else in the caravansarai, these were intact. The wood was dark and reinforced with iron bands, etched with faintly glowing sigils. No dust coated them. No sand had worked its way into the seams. When the lids were opened, the contents gleamed. Inside lay magical armor and weapons, carefully arranged and wrapped in oilcloth and velvet. Each piece was pristine, humming softly with contained power. Blades that caught the light too eagerly. Armor that felt strangely warm, as though it remembered being worn. Resting atop the nearest crate was a folded note, yellowed but unfrayed. The handwriting was precise, aristocratic. Good hunting. The wind in the courtyard shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scent of incense. The mirage-like shimmer in the air thickened, and the cracked tiles beneath their feet began to vibrate with a low, resonant hum. From the far end of the caravansarai, beyond the collapsed archway and the shadow of the broken fountain, something vast moved. At first it was only a silhouette, massive, sinuous, and wrong in its proportions. Then it stepped fully into the light. The creature was unmistakably feline in shape, yet impossibly large, its body draped in sleek teal fur that shimmered like polished jade. Its shoulders rolled with predatory grease as it advanced. Gold circlets and chains hung from its neck and limbs, set with enormous gemstones that glowed faintly, amber, amethyst, and opal, casting fractured light across the courtyard walls. Its eyes, long and slitted, burned with an ancient, knowing intelligence. A low growl rippled from its chest, vibrating through the bones of everyone present. Weapons were drawn, spells half-formed on trembling lips. Someone swore under their breath. Then Zenobia stepped forward.
Easy.
She said calmly, raising one hand.
Don't do anything foolish.
The creature's lips curled, revealing long, elegant fangs. The tension tightened, until Zenobia added, with a sigh of recognition,
It's our friend, Percival.
the massive head tilted, golden eyes narrowing with theatrical offense.
Friend?
The creature rumbled, its voice deep and resonant, echoing through the courtyard like distant thunder.
Such a small word for such a magnificent being.
It padded closer, each step deliberate, until its enormous face loomed over them.
Do not cower, little dream walkers.
It purred.
You stand in the presence of Lord Percival, sovereign of the Velvet Dunes, keeper of the Sapphire Thresholds, and, most importantly, your gracious host. Welcome to the Dreamlands.
The party pressed deeper into the Caravansarai, their footsteps echoing softly across stone worn smooth by centuries of trade and abandonment. Market stalls lined the courtyard in crooked rows, wooden counters warped by heat, canvas awnings reduced to tatters, and shelves buried nearby shaggy faves and feshes infested. Every movement stirred the dust into slow, ghostly clouds that shimmered in the strange light, filtering down from the open sky above. They pried open cracked crates and overturned chests, finding little of value: tarnished brass trinkets, splintered tools, scraps of rotted cloth. But now and then something survived the ages: a vial of still-glowing alchemical fluid, a silver clasp etched with forgotten runes, a dagger whose edge had never dulled. At the far end of the market, a narrow door hung crookedly from its hinges. When they pushed it open, the smell hit them first. Old dust and something faintly sweet, long decayed. Inside, slumped against a stack of collapsed crates, lay a skeleton wrapped in the remnants of once fine robes. Around its neck hung a wooden placard, the letters carved deep and deliberate. Haran. Chill crept through the room. No one spoke. Then the air behind them shifted. A figure coalesced from the shadows, tall and indistinct at first, as though cut from smoke and dusk. As it stepped closer, its form sharpened, a robed silhouette with a narrow, smiling face, and eyes that glowed like dying embers. Its lower body dissolved into curling wisps of vapor that never quite touched the ground.
Welcome, travelers.
It said smoothly, its voice echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once.
I am the keeper of the Caravansarai. Few still honor these halls with their presence.
The group tensed. Zenobia studied the figure carefully, her gaze narrowing.
If you are the keeper, why does this place reek of abandonment and death?
The figure smiled wider.
All things fade, even guardians.
As it drifted closer, the air grew cold. Shadows stretched unnaturally toward its form, and the torchlight dimmed as if being swallowed. Riker stared down at the figure's lower body. It seemed to be unraveling into smoke, never quite touching the ground. He blew his horn. To battle! The thing's smile vanished. With a hiss like escaping breath, it lashed out, a wave of numbing necrotic energy surging through the room. Steel rang. Incantations flared. Then Arabella stepped forward. Her eyes glowed with an inner light as she raised her hands, tracing sigils in the air that shimmered like frost. The air around her warped, and from the veil between worlds, shapes began to emerge, pale, translucent beings with elongated limbs and shifting faces, bound to her will by ancient pact and whispered name. They surged toward the spectre, their forms half light, half shadow, shrieking in voices that did not belong to this world. The keeper recoiled, its form tearing apart under the assault of spectral claws and radiant force. It let out a final hollow cry, half rage, half relief, before unraveling into tatters of black smoke that were quickly swallowed by the still air of the Caravansarai. Silence fell once more. Dust drifted slowly back to the ground. The ancient market stood empty again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. as if the dreamlands themselves had taken note of the intruders who had dared to walk its forgotten paths. The corridor narrowed as the party pressed deeper into the forgotten hallways of the Caravansarai, the air growing cooler and strangely still. Dust lay thick on the floor, yet their footsteps made no sound, as though the silence itself absorbed them. At the end of the passage, they found a heavy wooden door, half rotted and hanging crooked on its hinges. When it creaked open, a soft silver light spilled out into the dark. Inside was a chamber unlike any they had yet seen, where crates and ledges should have been. The space had been transformed into a shrine. Hundreds of candles, some melted to stubs, others freshly lit, covered every surface, their flames unmoving despite the stale air. At the center stood a silver statue of a robed woman, tall and serene, her face turned slightly upward as if listening to something far away. A crescent moon rested upon her brow, and her outstretched hands seemed to cradle an invisible offering. The silver gleamed with an inner light, pale and cool as moonlight on water. Malachi stopped short, his breath catching in his throat.
Careful,
He said quietly, but with sudden urgency.
do not touch anything here.
The others turned to him, surprised by the tension in his voice. He swallowed and lowered his gaze in reverence.
This is Ashava, the moon shepherdess, the gatherer of the lost.
His eyes flicked back to the statue.
They say when souls wander too far, when they die without peace, or lose themselves between worlds, she gathers them here, gives them rest, or keeps them from becoming something worse.
As if in response, the candles flickered, and for a brief moment the room seemed crowded with a presence just beyond sight. A hush settled over the group, thick and reverent. The air felt heavy, not with menace, but with sorrow and memory. From somewhere deep in the chamber came the faintest sound, like a distant sigh, or a lullaby carried on moonlight. The air in the shrine suddenly shifted, the stillness shattering like thin glass, the candles guttered, their flames bending inward as though inhaled by something unseen. From the far corner of the chamber the darkness moved. With a grinding rasp of desiccated bone, a towering figure pulled itself upright. Its body was bound in rotting linen stained black with age. Sigils burned into the cloth with old necromantic fire. Empty eye sockets glimmered with a sickly green light. When it opened its mouth, there was no breath, only a crawling hiss, as a swarm of black scarabs poured forth like living smoke.
By the gods!
Jock shouted, but the words were lost as the swarm exploded outward. The beetles swarmed over the party in a chittering tide. Where they touched skin, flesh blistered and blackened, strength draining away in seconds. Angelica cried out and collapsed, her breath shallow as necrotic magic gnawed at her body. Malachi staggered but held his ground. Gritting his teeth, he raised his mace, holy symbols etched along its head flaring with pale light.
You do not belong in this place.
He growled, stepping forward through the swarm. Each swing crushed beetles into smoking ruin, but the mummy advanced inexorably, arms raised in a mockery of benediction. Arabella spun away from a grasping claw, her voice rising in a sharp incantation. Silver sigils burst into the air around her as she thrust her hands forward.
Spirits of the Twilight Court, answer me.
From the curling magic emerged a lithe, fey shape, all moonlight and form, its eyes blazing with ancient mischief and fury. It hurled itself at the mummy, raking and shrieking, forcing the creature back toward the altar. But then the mummy lunged forwards again, striking Jock to the ground with a burst of necrotic energy. Suddenly, Percival appeared from the darkness and surged forward, his fury unleashed. His eyes blazed with celestial fury. With a roar that shook dust from the rafters, he struck. Claws like scythes tore through ancient wrappings, ripping away centuries of dead flesh. The mummy reeled, trying to raise its arms, but Percival was relentless. Another strike, then another, until the creature collapsed inward, its body collapsing into a heap of ash and brittle bone. The scarabs shrieked and scattered, dissolving into black dust as the magic sustaining them dissipated. Silence fell once more. Only the flicker of candles remained, their light steady again, casting long shadows across the shrine. The silver statue of Ashava stood untouched, serene and sorrowful, as if bearing witness to yet another lost soul finally laid to rest. Slowly, the air grew lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. Those who had fallen stirred, breathing once more. Malachi lowered his mace, exhaustion etched across his face. "It's over," he said quietly.
Ashava has reclaimed what was hers.
The dining hall. Angelica pushed open a door that led back to the courtyard.
Wandering around this desert ruin is fun and all, but it would be nice to know what we are looking for. There are plenty of monsters to fight back in Caliphas. This seems pointless.
Zenobia shook her head.
We have to find the mad poet if we want to find Lulz. There must be some sign of him here.
Malachi made a sweeping gesture with his hand.
All of this, I think, somehow all of this is his dream. He must be close.
Angelica sneered.
Dream? More like a nightmare.
Rickus grinned.
Yes, that makes sense. This poet, Graylin told me he was from some desert tribe of long ago.
Percival toppled a broken stone pillar with his giant paw.
Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal rack, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Look upon my works, ye mighty and despair.
Jock looked at the giant creature and frowned.
I liked that cat better when it couldn't talk,
he thought to himself. He crossed the courtyard and pushed open two large wooden doors.
Zenobia, look here.
The wizard stepped over to Jock and looked into the room.
This must have been the dining hall.
Jock nodded.
I'll go in first and smash anything that moves. Just be ready to shoot a magic death ray or something if things go south.
The large room had 3 elegant wooden tables and stools of varying sizes. It also appeared to be empty. But as Jock and Zenobia stepped into the hall, ghostly forms appeared at the tables, oblivious to the adventurers. Before them stood what appeared to be a wealthy night hag with elaborately coiffed hair. 3 human servants cowered as she berated them. At the next table, 3 turbaned humanoids conferred over a detailed image of the moon. At the last table, a group of hooded ghouls examined a human head made of terracotta.
We better get Malachi,
whispered Jock. Suddenly, the air in the chamber grew cold, as if the warmth had been pulled from it in a single hungry breath. All the figures turned and looked at the intruders, then began to scream. Zenobia readied a spell, and Jock raised his gleaming warhammer. The screams overlapped, shrill, hollow, inhuman, echoing off the stone until they blurred into one sustained wail. The ghostly figures twisted and contorted, mouths stretched wide in silent agony, their forms unraveling like smoke caught in a violent wind. But then the figures just faded away into the shadow, as if it had all been some kind of dream or vision. The dining hall stood empty once more. The 3 wooden tables remained, their surfaces polished and unmarred, the stools neatly arranged as if awaiting guests who would never return. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive, broken only by the faint creak of settling wood. Jock stood rigid, knuckles white around the haft of his hammer. His breath came in shallow bursts.
Did you see them? They were looking at us.
Zenobia nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the place where the night hag had stood.
They weren't just memories,
she said.
They were impressions, echoes left behind by things that once had will, hunger, purpose.
She shuddered.
And they knew we didn't belong.
A chill crept along the floor, brushing their ankles like a living thing. For a brief moment, the scent of old incense and spoiled meat returned, then vanished again. From somewhere beyond the far wall came a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like fingernails dragging across stone. Whatever had once feasted in this hole was gone, but it had not forgotten how to watch. The change came without warning, like a switch thrown deep inside Jock's mind. His eyes went wide, pupils swallowing the light. His breath hitched, sharp and ragged, and he staggered back as though the shadows themselves had lunged at him.
They're all watching.
He hissed.
They've always been watching.
Jock!
Zenobia stepped toward him, one hand raised, her voice steady but urgent.
It's not real. You're still here.
But he was already gone. With a terrifying roar, Jock swung his warhammer in a blind, desperate arc. The weapon crashed into Zenobia's neck with a sickening finality. There was no blood, only a sound like breaking porcelain, and her body folded to the stone, as if its weight had suddenly been taken away. For an instant, she lay still. Then her form flickered, her outline blurred, frayed at the edges, and collapsed inward like smoke drawn into a vacuum. Where she had fallen, there was nothing. No body, no blood, only cold stone and the echo of impact. The chamber fell deathly silent. Jock stared at the empty space, his breath stuttering.
No! No! No!
His hammer slipped from his fingers and struck the floor with a dull clang. The scream tore from Wizard's throat as if ripped out of her by unseen hands. She bolted upright, gasping, her lungs burning as though she had been drowning. Candlelight swam wildly before her eyes. A heart hammered so violently she thought it might tear free of her chest. The familiar stone ceiling of the Harrowday Theatre's ritual chamber came into view as the dreamlands faded away. Her body was drenched in sweat.
Zenobia!
Thalia was already at her side, gripping her shoulders.
You're awake. Thank the gods. These things can be unpredictable.
Zenobia looked around the room, her vision finally clearing.
I'm still alive.
Yes, mostly.